The Last Letter. The town of Ravens Hollow was deep within the deep woods, a place that seemed not of time. Cobblestone streets wound like veins through this old town, with the weight of centuries in each crumbling house, whispering old secrets and hidden darkness. Always thick with mist, heavy as if the shadows, even the stillness is unnatural, as if holding its breath is part of the town. The residents of Ravens Hollow were a reclusive lot. They lived in harmony, yet there was an unspoken understanding that the town was not like other places. It was a town with a history that many tried to forget, but one that could never truly be erased. The story begins with Edward Ashford, a young man who had returned to his ancestral home after years of living in the city. Edward had inherited the Ashford estate, an old manor that stood on the outskirts of the village. His return was met with mixed reactions from the townspeople. Some were glad to see him back, others wary. For in Ravens Hollow, the Ashford name was tied to a past that was shrouded in mystery and fear. Edward, however, knew nothing about the dark history of his family. The last time his family had lived in the manor, a curse had been unleashed. A curse that haunted the town for generations. It was said to have begun with his great-grandfather, who had made a pact with a dark force known only as the Veil of Darkness. The Veil, a malevolent entity, was believed to grant power and wealth, but at a terrible cost. Those who entered into its pact were doomed to carry the curse for the rest of their lives. Their souls would be claimed when the time came, and in the meantime, they would witness a slow, maddening descent into despair and madness. Edward had heard rumors of this curse but dismissed them as mere superstition. Little did he know, his return to Ravens Hollow would awaken the very darkness his family had tried to bury. The first sign that something was wrong came on Edward's first night in the manor. As the wind howled through the cracks in the old building, he found an old letter addressed to him, left on the dining table. The letter was aged and yellowed, as though it had been there for years. The handwriting was unfamiliar, yet strangely familiar at the same time. Something about it made his skin crawl. It read as follows: Edward Ashford, the time has come to confront what your family has kept secret. The veil of darkness awaits. The curse is not broken. It lives on, and you are its next victim. Your grandfather failed, but you must succeed where he did not. You must stop it before it claims you and the rest of Ravens Hollow. But be careful, because those who came before you paid dearly for their ignorance. All will be lost if you fail. The letter was signed with one single cryptic symbol, a symbol that Edward knew to come from an old family heirloom. It was his great-grandfather's ring-a-ring that had always been a part of his family's history. So how could this be? He had never been told anything about a curse. Could it be true? Was this town really cursed? That night, Edward was visited by a strange woman named Miriam, a historian of sorts who had been studying the history of Ravens Hollow. She had heard of his return and insisted on meeting him. Miriam told him stories of his great-grandfather's dealings with dark forces and how the family had tried to hide the truth. She spoke of the Veil of Darkness and how it had caused the untimely deaths of many people in the town over the years. The more Edward heard, the more he realized that the town's eerie atmosphere wasn't just a result of superstition. It was the result of something far darker, something that was growing stronger with each passing year. As days went by, the strange events started to increase. The old clocks in the manor would chime at odd hours, echoing through the empty halls, even though they were broken. Shadows moved against the light, and whispers could be heard through the walls, as if the house itself was alive and aware. But the most terrifying event came when Edward found the second letter, the one that would reveal the true nature of the curse. The letter was hidden in a locked chest, buried under the floor of the manor. It was addressed to Edward's great-grandfather, and the letter said, "The pact is complete. The veil has been called. The price will be paid. Only the blood of the Ashford family can end it. But beware, the bloodline is cursed. Darkness will take one of you, and your soul will be lost to the veil forever. The tension in Raven's Hollow was palpable as Edward began piecing together the horrific truth. The curse was real, and it was only a matter of time before it claimed him. The villagers, who had once been so distant, now seemed to be watching him with a mix of fear and pity. Miriam, too, grew increasingly worried, urging Edward to leave before it was too late. But Edward could not leave. He had to know the truth, had to understand the curse that had haunted his family for so long. Equipped with nothing but the knowledge from the letters and his great-grandfather's journal, he ventured into the woods, where the veil between the living and the dead was said to be thinnest. That is where, at the heart of the forest, he realized true strength in the veil of darkness. The forest itself was nothing Edward had ever known to see before. Twisted and gnarled were the trees, the limbs stretching out like dead skeletal hands. The air grew thick with unnatural fog. The ground seemed to heave and shift, almost like a living thing. As he went further, he found himself in a clearing where an ancient stone altar stood. This was the place where his great-grandfather had made the pact with the veil, and it was here that the final confrontation would take place. The veil of darkness materialized before him, a swirling mass of shadow and whispers. It was no longer just a myth, but a living, breathing entity. Its voice echoed in Edward's mind, promising him power beyond his wildest dreams, but at a terrible cost. Edward was faced with a choice: accept the veil's offer and become its next servant, or destroy it once and for all, knowing that it would mean his death. With one final despicable cry, Edward forced the great-grandfather's ring inside the heart of the veil, shattering the curse. Darkness shrieked as it twisted and contorted in pain. Yet at the moment of veil collapse, Edward could sense his life being torn out from him, and dying. He knew Raven's Hollow would finally be free. The next morning, the first sun to rise over the town of Raven's Hollow after years broke through the roof, warming everything in its radiant light. The air felt lighter, and the oppressive fog that had hung over the village for so long began to lift. The curse was broken, but only at a terrible cost. Edward Ashford was nowhere to be found, his body to never be seen again, and the manor stood bare, silent witness to its dark history. Miriam, the historian, stayed in town, her research finally complete. She had now seen Edward's sacrifice in action and would make sure he was never forgotten. Raven's Hollow, free of its veil of darkness, would begin to heal, forever bearing the scars. The last letter, written by Edward himself, was discovered only after his death. It served as a warning to any who might follow him, a warning that the darkness was never truly gone, only waiting for the next soul to awaken it. And so, the story of the Veil of Darkness passed into legend, a chilling reminder of the price of meddling with forces beyond human understanding. As the days passed in Raven's Hollow, a quiet calm began to settle over the town. The chilling fog, which had haunted the village for generations, finally began to dissipate, allowing the sun to shine more brightly than it had in years. The villagers, who had lived in constant fear of the curse, could finally breathe easier. However, for some, a deep sense of unease lingered. They were not sure whether the events of Edward's final confrontation had really broken the veil of darkness, or if it was just the calm before a greater storm. Miriam sat at her desk, a whirlwind of questions and what-ifs. Edward's final sacrifice had been noble enough, yet there were pieces missing in the story that she just couldn't seem to make add up. The last letter he had left her had been cryptic at best, and although he seemed confident that he had destroyed the veil, Miriam just couldn't help but think that there was something else out there, something Edward had failed to uncover. Despite the seeming serenity of Raven's Hollow, strange things started happening again. It was almost imperceptible, like a shadow flickering at the corner of one's eye, a door creaking open in the middle of the night, or a faint whisper carried by the wind. Then it just got worse. A feeble old villager was found wandering the streets in a panic, mumbling about a figure in darkness that had followed him from the forest. Another said he saw strange symbols carved into the stone walls of their homes, symbols no one in Raven's Hollow could decipher. Miriam couldn't ignore the signs anymore. The curse was not gone. Instead, it seemed to be building more strength, manifesting in ways that were more terrifying than she could ever imagine. Edward thought he had killed the Veil, but now Miriam realized that the entity was not so easily dead. The Veil of Darkness had not been defeated. It had only retreated, awaiting its right moment for a comeback. Miriam started her own investigation, going deeper into the cursed history of the Ashford family. She studied old texts, interviewed the oldest residents of the town, and even visited the now-abandoned manor where Edward had made his final stand. It was during one of these visits that she discovered something horrifying. Hidden beneath the floorboards in the manor, in a small, forgotten chamber, she found another letter. The letter was the same one Edward had received before his death, but this one was dated after his death. It stated, "The Veil was never truly destroyed, for it does not simply die. It exists in the spaces between worlds, in the shadows of our consciousness. It feeds on fear, on regret, on unfinished business. Edward Ashford's bloodline was never meant to be the final sacrifice. There will be another, and when the Veil returns, it will be stronger than before." The handwriting was unmistakable. It matched the writing in Edward's own letters, but this was not his voice. This letter had been written by someone else, someone who had been watching, waiting for the right moment to bring the curse back. Miriam felt a dread wash over her as it became clear to her. The Veil of Darkness never had been defeated, but just waiting for the next generation to take on the curse. As Miriam assembled the pieces, the town of Raven's Hollow began to feel the reverberations of the Veil's return. The mystery of people disappearing started again. Villagers seen walking down the street one minute, gone the next without a trace. By night, the peaceful woods around the town seemed to stir with unnatural sounds, whispers, footsteps, and the faint cry of something, or someone, lost to the darkness. Miriam knew that she had to act quickly. The Veil was gaining power, and it would soon be too strong to stop. She sought out the remaining members of the Ashford family, those who had long since left Raven's Hollow, hoping that they could help her break the curse once and for all. Miriam met the Ashfords one by one, each one more distanced and disconnected from his own family's dark past than the last. Most had never heard of the curse, those who had dismissed it as mere folklore. But now, as Miriam would explain the events that went down, the shadow of fear began to settle within their hearts. They realized too late that they were the last line of defense. They were the bloodline which Veil sought to lay its claim on, the last sacrifice in its insidious ritual. Miriam led them into the forest where Veil had first been summoned, where it started its terrible reign. It was there where they would face the dark force head-on. What, however, they encountered in the woods was nothing what they had expected. The clearing where Edward had faced the Veil was empty. The altar where he had destroyed the curse was gone, replaced by a large stone obelisk covered in strange symbols. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, and the shadows stretched unnaturally long. The Veil was no longer a swirling mass of darkness. It had taken form, and it was far more powerful than they could have imagined. It was no shadow, but a man, though his features were masked by a cloak of swirling darkness. His eyes had that cold, malevolent light to them as he spoke in a voice that echoed in their minds. "Do you think you can kill me? Do you think you can outrun your destiny? The Veil of Darkness is not a curse. It's the natural course of nature, unrelenting and immortal. You, the Ashford bloodline, are tied to me. You will never be free." and now you will pay for the sins of your ancestor." A battle unlike any other ensued. Miriam and the Ashfords fought with everything they had, but the veil was too powerful. It warped reality itself, twisting the forest around them, pulling them into visions of their deepest fears and regrets. It preyed on their weaknesses, each member of the Ashford family succumbing to the darkness in their own way. But Miriam did not give up. She remembered the last letter, the one where it had warned her that the veil is not exactly what it appears to be, and so she knew, if they are to vanquish it, she and her sisters would need to make the ultimate sacrifice, one that would bind the veil to the blood of Ashford for eternity, at the cost of their very souls. But at her last act of courage, Miriam and the Ashfords, who remained behind, called upon a forbidden rite that demanded the very essence, blood, a descendant from the last of their kind. The forest light exploded, and in it, the veil was screaming so hard it sounded as if the earth below their feet was going to be moved. As the sun set, the veil disappeared, and so did the Ashfords. Their bloodline was no longer. The town of Ravenshollow began rebuilding for a second time. Things would never be the same again in Ravenshollow. The accursed town was now without any living heirs, and with them, the shadow that had loomed over the village for generations. Miriam, the last witness, came back to town, reminding everyone that a price had been paid to get rid of the veil of darkness. But as she left the town behind, she couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness wasn't truly gone. The shadow still lingered in the corners of her mind, whispering that one day, the veil would return, waiting for the next soul to call. And so, the tale of the Ashford family, the veil of darkness, and the accursed town of Ravenshollow went down into legend. A cautionary tale for all who dared delve into the mysteries of yesteryear. Years went by, and Ravenshollow slowly began to heal. The trees that once whispered with the secrets of the veil of darkness stood tall again, and the winds no longer carried the scent of fear that had plagued the village for so long. The curse, it seemed, had been lifted. The townspeople rebuilt, and the ashes of their ancestors past were buried, forgotten beneath the weight of time. But Miriam, now older and wiser, could not forget. She left Ravenshollow behind, carrying with her the heavy burden of what had happened. The town's peaceful facade offered no comfort to her restless mind. Every night as she drifted to sleep, she felt the pull of the darkness, like a distant whisper calling from beyond the veil. It haunted her dreams and clouded her waking moments. She felt the urge to look for answers. The truth that had been hidden by the Ashford family, the letter that had warned of the curse's return, gnawed at her thoughts. Edward's sacrifice had been monumental, but had it truly ended the curse? Or had it merely delayed the inevitable? One stormy evening, while she was staying at an old inn on the outskirts of a distant city, Miriam received a letter. The envelope was dark, almost black, and the handwriting on the front was not familiar. It was written in the same elegant script that Edward had used, but the words were different, cold, ominous. "Miriam, it is not over. The veil has only shifted its form. You are not free of the darkness. It still watches you, waiting for the moment to reclaim what was stolen from it. The Ashford bloodline has not been destroyed, it has been hidden. The final letter was only part of the truth. The full letter still waits to be found, where the veil was born. Do not ignore it, for when the time comes, it will be too late." Miriam's heart stopped as she read the chilling words. The veil had not been destroyed, only waiting for her to seek the truth in the place where it had all begun, the cursed forest. Determined to face the truth, Miriam returned to Ravenshollow. The town, though thriving and bustling with life, still felt strange to her. The once familiar streets seemed foreign, as if they no longer belonged to the world she knew. She made her way to the forest, the place where the final battle had taken place. She ventured further into the woods, the air chillier. Leaves had wilted, and now bare trees twisted in all directions. The shadows seemed to stretch across unnaturally, while soft rustling of leaves held a faint whisper. It seemed as if the forest was waiting, watching every movement she made. Miriam's heart was pounding because she was walking towards the clearing where Edward had been sacrificed. There, in the center of the clearing, stood the stone obelisk, its surface covered in new, unrecognizable symbols. Miriam's breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer. She could feel the darkness surrounding her, pressing against her chest, suffocating her with its weight. The veil was close, and it was not going to let her leave. Miriam reached out to touch the obelisk, her fingers stroking the cold stone. She felt the ground beneath her feet shudder, the air grow thick and still, as if a storm would break. She heard faint chanting, far off and growing louder. It was a low, rhythmic hum, one that seemed to echo from the depths of the earth itself. Suddenly, the symbols on the obelisk began to glow, one by one. The whispers in the wind grew louder, and the trees around her seemed to twist and bend, their branches reaching toward her like skeletal fingers. Miriam took a step back, her heart racing as the dark energy coiled around her, pulling her deeper into the forest. Out of the shadows came a figure, shrouded in darkness. Its face was obscured, but Miriam could feel its gaze pierce into her soul. It was the same being that she had met years before, the one who spoke in Edward's final moments. The veil was now fully awakened and assumed a new form, unwilling to let Miriam go. "Miriam Ashford," the figure intoned, its voice a whisper of pure malice. "You cannot flee from what is woven into your very blood. You are the last of your line, the final thread in the web of the veil. You are bound to me, to the darkness, and now your soul shall join the others who came before you." Miriam stood motionless, her mind racing. She had assumed that with Edward's death, she was finally free. The curse was gone, and gone was the binding to time. And yet now she realized that this curse was not bound to time, that it couldn't be destroyed. It was eternal, fed by the very souls of the Ashford bloodline. The figure reached toward her, long fingers curling into claws. Miriam's heart pounded in her ears as the air around her filled with the stench of rot. The veil closed in on her, and she had no choice but to face it. She remembered the riddle in the letter. The whole letter is yet to be discovered. The truth was all along there, but where? Where could she discover the key to free herself of the curse? It was then that she realized that the key had been in her all along, inside the ashes of Edward's sacrifice. Miriam reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the final letter, the one that had been hidden in the folds of history. She unfolded it with trembling hands and read the words aloud. "The veil is not a thing to be destroyed. It is not a curse. It is a creation, born of the bloodline that created it. To banish it, you must offer the soul of the last heir, for only then can the veil be consumed. The bloodline ends with you, Miriam Ashford. Your soul will be the final offering." The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. Edward had not been the true sacrifice. She was. The darkness would consume her, and the curse would be bound to her soul forever. But there was another way, a way to end the cycle once and for all. In an impassioned determination, Miriam stepped forward as the last sacrifice, and in the act, she would terminate the veil's evil reign. Dark clouds curled and swirled around her, their chilled tendrils wrapping tightly, suffocating her. However, during that moment, Miriam felt peace. The veil had consumed her. However, in that victory, it would forever remain bound to her. There was no longer any bloodline of Ashford, and with that, a curse was ended and cannot be reversed anymore. The village of Ravens Hollow would never forget the sacrifices of Miriam and the Ashford family. The curse was finally gone, and the town was free to live in peace. But the story of the Veil of Darkness and the woman who gave her life to rid the world of it would live on in whispers, told by those who still remembered. For Miriam, her name became a legend, a warning to all who would seek to uncover the darkest of secrets. And though the darkness was gone, the shadows never quite left Raven's Hollow. They lingered, waiting in the corners of the world for the next person foolish enough to seek the final letter. And so, the story of the final letter was told once again, by the wind, by the trees, and by the whispers of the past that would never truly be silenced.